When have you seen the real world hit a spoiled brat? I used to repair trails for the Forest Service, and I wouldn't call anybody a brat necessarily, but we are all pretty spoiled when it comes to manual labor and sleeping on the ground point on day 1. The bush plane flies the crew out to a grass airstrip about 40 miles east of town. Then you shoulder your pack, grab an axe and a shovel, and start hiking up the canyon. Usually in the rain point, until you watch that plane disappear over the ridge. It's hard to imagine what you've signed up for. Hard labor all day every day. Working, cooking, and camping in the rain that whole first month. No phone, no mail, no roof, and if you forgot something, you'll just have to live without it until the road opens in July. Wolves and mountain lions circle the camp at night. Sometimes bears come for your food point. Everybody struggles for the first month. You'd see the kid who'd been the hard guy on his high school football team start to sit through lunch with his head in his hands, just licked. Guys who were in the 1,000-pound club at their gym slumped up against a tree all evening, eating peanut butter for dinner because they were too beat to cook. Demanding as the job was, it wasn't really a physical issue. The best workers on the crew were hippie Jesus types with noodle arms who read Marcus Aurelius around the campfire at night. They just took everything as it came, because no matter what, it just kept coming. Them and the Mormon ranch kids. I don't know how those kids came up, but nothing brought them down. Edit. If you want to apply for such a job, you can on usajobs.gov. Or you can volunteer through theska.org, or join an AmeriCorps at nationalservice.gov. Good luck, it's actually a lot of fun after the first couple weeks. A kid in college was a roommate of a friend of mine. He was always bratty and spoiled, but hung out with us as if he were a good friend, and we let him chill with us because sometimes he wasn't bad. Then one day we heard him arguing with his mom on the phone that he needed more money. From the ensuing argument we learned that he had, in less than 1 year, burned through 30 grand that his parents gave him for food and discretionary spending. Mind you, he was not paying for tuition or lodging or his car with this money. It was basically just food money, as all those other things were also already covered by his parents. He was calling his mother some really nasty things and hung up on her. Then his father called and they got in an argument, cussing each other out. At the end of that call he threw his iPhone at the wall and shattered it. This was the original iPhone. Turns out they cut him off and basically he had to drop out of school and drive back home, out of state, because he couldn't afford to do anything anymore, and of course was too good to work a pleb's job. He added me on Facebook about a year later, and was a late blooming 9/11 truther. Obama was president by this time, and the only thing I ever said to him on FB was a simple reply correcting one fact he was wrong about in his 9/11 conspiracy theory. He then posted like 4 replies in quick succession telling me to open my eyes, and then blocked me. Simple and pure example for my part. There was only one coffee shop on my campus, operating out of the library building, and it was always crowded. You pretty quickly learned that if you wanted coffee before class, you got there 20 minutes early, grabbed a newspaper, I'm old, sue me, and took your time. It was always funny watching incoming freshmen crowd the line 5 minutes before their 8 AM and slowly filter out in despair as they realized there was absolutely no way they were reaching that sweet Sumatra Nirvana in time. Cue this little freshman girl, dressed in the classic campus t-shirt, jean shorts, blonde ponytail coming out the ball cap starter pack, walking up, a sign the line stretching out the door, and boldly deciding to just sorta skip it. Now the baristas were usually pretty cool with people skipping for simple things, dropping down a quarter for some scantrons or $1 for a cookie, anything that didn't require interaction. Not this girl. She caught the barista's attention while the previous customer was still paying and went, "Hi, yay, can I get a latte please?" Like really quickly. The line starts back there, replied the now slightly confused girl behind the counter, "But I have class," whined the freshman. There was an awkward pause before the barista responded, "You are on a college campus. Are you freaking serious? Why do you think all these people are here?" Back of the line. "Oh" was the only thing the freshman girl thought to say. As she turned to look at a line full of people staring daggers back at her, she looked not upset or embarrassed, but sort of enraptured by this newfound understanding she's just been imparted. It's like for first time in her entire life she realized that other people were in her way for reasons. It was actually kind of beautiful to watch, like a baby learning to walk for the first time. Better late than never. Oh goody. I remembered this earlier today and was hoping I'd be able to share. Not sure if this really qualifies, but it's a good one. So this gem isn't about a child. This was a full-grown woman, maybe mid-30s, who very clearly was handed everything in life. Spoiled, selfish, entitled, whatever you want to call it. She was way out of touch with reality. So I grew up in a very nice, upper middle class area with nothing but houses for miles around. At the center is a small block with a little grocery store, a few boutiques, restaurants, and a drugstore. It being the only shopping center anywhere around tends to attract really snobby people. Anyway, I was maybe 14 or 15 and went to the drugstore to grab something or other and happened to wander past the makeup aisle. This drugstore is pretty large, so their makeup selection is huge, with every brand you can think of taking up one whole wall of the building. I had just rounded the corner where I saw this woman sitting on the ground, just as I saw the manager coming around the opposite corner making a beeline for her like a bulldog. He stops, arms crossed, and the following happens. Him, ma'am, I hope you know that you have to pay for those. Her. What? Him? The makeup. All of these packages you've opened. You have to pay for them. He gestured about towards where I was standing, still at the end of the aisle. I looked down to my right and saw what he was pointing at. The pressed powder compacts. She had opened one of each shade ranging from ivory to warm beige and left the remains in piles at the bottom of each display. That's right, I said each. She went through every single brand and opened the packaged compacts. And to make it worse, each brand usually makes more than one type of pressed powder. There had to have been at least 40 of them. Agitated. What do you mean? I don't understand. Why do I have to pay for them when I only need one? Him. Having a stroke because you've destroyed them and because you've used them. We can no longer sell these to anyone else because they've been contaminated by you. Her. Becoming irate. Well, I needed to test them to match my skin tone. It was at this point I realized that, next to all the compacts were the used makeup sponges that come with them, as well as what appeared to be used baby wipes. Him. Impending aneurysm. Well, I hope it was worth all the money you now owe us. This was about 15 years ago, so the remainder of the conversation is a fuzzy. I know she was panic crying and was refusing to pay, and he threatened to pay the cops. But I had to leave at that point, so I didn't get to see the outcome. But I do know that I did a little math when I got home. Nowadays one of those compact will cost about $10 each. But back then I'd say 5 to 6. So she had to pay at least $240 at the end of that. My ex-best friend was raised spoiled. His family wasn't very rich, but they still always tried their best to get him everything he asked for and never taught him to take responsibility for his mistakes. He'll write a list of the things he pulled after leaving school. Got 3 strikes on his license and lost it by running a red light. Wasn't his fault because there weren't many cars around. Speeding through a school zone wasn't his fault because there were no kids around, even though he was going so fast that he would have been breaking the limit if the school zone limit wasn't in place. Getting pulled over and one of his passengers wasn't wearing a seatbelt was his fault for not wearing it. Quit his job because he wanted more time to skate. Did this by going to his ex's and sleeping with her instead of going to work, then bragging about it on Facebook. Centrelink refuses to pay him because he's not even trying to get a job, and no place will hire him because of his track record. Sexually assaulted a 14-year-old girl at a party. He was 21, somehow managed to get away with that. Also, this wasn't some massive drinking party, it was a family BBQ. Assaulted a bouncer at a nightclub and then assaulted the police who tried to arrest him. Spent a week in jail for that. Moved to Melbourne then Sydney and ended up being homeless for a couple years and is currently homeless in Germany. Will add more when I remember it. Edit. Okay, I remembered a few more. Another time he was skateboarding in a Hungry Jack's car park and a policeman asked him to move on. Not sure how it got to this, but he ended up assaulting the policeman and taken to the station. His family had a friend who was a cop and stuck his neck out to get him released, and he then tried to sue the cop who arrested him for assault. Also he had a 15-year-old kid with him at the time, who was drunk and high, so as well as assault he was facing a charge of supplying to minors B. Caught a train from Sydney to Melbourne and didn't pay. Thought he got away with it until his mum got a $350 fine in the mail. He never officially moved out. She demanded he pay it immediately. Drove down for the day to ask for money with his girlfriend and his mother reluctantly gave it to him. A few months later his mother gets a bill for $960 in the mail because he never used the $350 money to pay the original bill. His mother tries calling him but can't get through for days, so she calls his girlfriend and she says they broke up a week after that visit and she has no idea where he is. See, also on that same train ride to Sydney his friends abandoned him and he freaked out and got arrested. I took a screenshot of the convo and posted on r/Incinepia Facebook a few years ago and will post the link once I find it. Edit. Here it is. He has posted a whole bunch of pathetic Facebook posts that either beg people for sympathy or money. Unfortunately he deleted these, so I can't find them. I was out at a farm with my cousins for a party. It was more like an afternoon barbecue with all the parents sat talking and cooking while the kids ran around playing. Usual lazy afternoon in Africa. So anyway, I was 16 at the time, making me the oldest of the kids, and I will admit that I was all back of the bus / too cool for school type of cringy teenager and was practicing my casual aloofness. Now there was this German couple there with this absolute monster child, 5, who made it his mission to terrorize all the other kids. The parents of little Adele sat beaming with delight watching their little ray of sunshine playing with the other kids. Eventually it became apparent that they were going to do nothing about it, and my parents told me to keep my cool and just ignore him. Which I did, because I didn't want to put my parents in an awkward situation. At some point in the afternoon the kid found one of those plastic toddler toys, you know, the ones where they can sit on it and push themselves around, but it also has a handle at the back that toddlers can use as a walker. So he finds this toy and is running around this lawn full speed, ramming all the other kids. Now I did tell him nicely that it was not good to hurt the other little boys and girls, but he clean ignored me and carried on with his game, giggling and chasing the other kids. He also decided that I was now fair game, and I got rammed in the ankles and Achilles tendon a few times, and I'm fuming. His parents were watching and laughing the whole time. Eventually I'm done with this sheet, so I position myself in front of this small ditch, only about 1/4 inch deep and full of grass, and pull out my phone pretending to read messages. I was making myself an easy target for the little brat. He comes charging up behind me, aiming for my heels again. The front wheels go into the little ditch, stopping the walker. The kid was pushing it so fast that his momentum carried him right over the handlebars, right over the push toy and past me, faceplants in the dirt, going full scorpion. There was no blood, but he lay there and screamed blue murder. The best part was that the parents watched the whole thing take place, and they and the other parents never suspected that I stood in that exact spot for that exact reason. His parents were kind of pissed that the kid hurt himself while I was watching the kids, but they couldn't say anything, so they just kept the boy close the rest of the day. When I was in high school there was this horribly bratty rich kid who loved to pick on others, push people around, and play the "do you know who my dad is" card a lot. Let's call him Todd. I hated this kid all through school. Final year of high school, I'd had a bad day one day, and it obviously showed. Todd sees me walking G in the hall and makes some snide remark about my shirt. I promptly tell him to shove it, as I'm not in the mood. He walks over to me while I'm at my locker and slams my locker door and shoves me. I recall that he said something else, but I honestly don't remember what it was. I just remember that I saw red and drove my fist into his nose like a truck. I stomped away all teenage and angsty. Got called to the office the next day. Todd is sitting there with his father and the principal. I knew I was faked. The principal shows us all the security camera footage of what went down. I'm assuming an expulsion is coming my way when Todd's father puts his hand on my shoulder and smiles. He tells Todd to say thank you, and we both look at him dumbfounded. Why would I thank him? He broke my nose, says Todd. His father responds with, because if I had been there and seen you act like that, I'd have killed you. He stood up and left, and I was excused to return to class. Todd never bothered me again. When it hit me point, I grew up in a very financially stable, loving household. My parents aimed to raise me to be smart with my money, since that's pretty much the main way they built such a good life for themselves, and I took it completely for granted. Never had to hold down a job, since they would still provide for all of my necessities. Never worried about being more frugal, shopping store brand, even though my mom did, thinking about wants vs needs, etc. I was stupid. I was spoiled, because my parents weren't very hard on me, because of my crippling anxiety and depression. I was a brat, because I looked down on poor people like, wow, you really can't afford gas? Save your money, dumbass. Then I moved out, when I was 20. I had to get a job to pay for stuff, and much to my dismay I couldn't just quit when it got tiring or difficult. I had to become more frugal, and I was humbled every time my boyfriend covered my share of bills when I didn't have enough money despite trying my best to save. He grew up way smarter about money than I did for sure. I've definitely become stronger and smarter, but I owe an apology to less fortunate friends I had growing up that would probably be thrilled to know that the real world has finally hit me. TLDR. Professor fails spoilt son. Point back in engineering school, one of my classmates was the son of one of our professors. Now, this professor was a really nice dude. He paid attention to his students, his classes were fun, and he rarely failed anyone. His son, on the other hand, was a total shat, rude and nasty, and would always brag about how his dad was a highly senior professor with tenure. "You know who my dad is, right?" was literally his catchphrase. He wasn't even a good student. We rank GPAs out of 10, and he was a 4. This professor actually taught a very specialized course, so we only had about 2 courses from him in our entire time at the school. This course in our 5th semester was a bit complicated. If you didn't do regular study, it was easy to fail, but if you practiced the stuff, passing it was a breeze point. So finals come around, and a shat is out there bragging that he didn't need to study because his dad will pass him anyway. He took this confidence all the way to the exam hall, and then the results were out. He had scored 7 out of 100. We know because the professor called us all to the classroom and displayed his answer sheet on the projector. According to him, he was the 3rd student who had failed in his 20-year teaching career, and he couldn't be more disappointed that it was his son. The amount of verbal ass whooping a shat received was enough to have him quivering like a wet cat in front of everyone. The next time he pulled the "do you know my dad" card, the standard answer he received was, "the one who failed you." He stopped pretty soon after that. He retook the exam the following year, failed again, and had to drop out. Wherever he is today, I hope he learned his lesson. In high school, one guy was a real jerk to everyone. He had no sense of anyone but himself, and everyone kissed his butt because he was not only valedictorian of his class, but also star football, basketball, tennis, and track star. He was top dog for all the extracurriculars as well. He made my best friend cry multiple times just being an ass toward her, and she had the unfortunate luck of being in his grade. He was also known as a player, just dating whoever he felt was hot enough for him, but would also put out for him. He honestly thought that nothing bad could ever happen to him, because he was just that special. He graduated high school and went to his school of choice and immediately came out as gay on social media. Not too long after that, he got his first boyfriend. Before the semester was even finished, his boyfriend cheated on him, and he flunked out of his college and ended up having to go to another school. Last time I saw him, he was super polite and seemed to be rather humbled by his experience outside of our tiny town. Edit. Forgot to add that his family had money too. They weren't insanely rich, but he always wore Abercrombie and Hollister clothes, and he bragged about how he refused to wear anything else. He also made fun of a lot of people who didn't have a lot of money, myself included. I don't know if that ever changed though. Worked at a fast food place across the street from a very big university for 8.25 an hour 4 years. Worst one I ever saw was a pretty little white blonde girl. They are infinite around here, literally in the middle of our restaurant on a cell phone. I noticed she was getting redder and redder in the face and being super animated over the course of a few minutes as she was standing in line, and then all of a sudden she is screaming at the top of her lungs so loud her face was strawberry red. I need my $500 early this week. I talked to that bitch you married about it already. Tell your guy to get that money in there now. I have a party I need to go to tonight. She whirls around at the two guys in line in front of her and demands she be allowed to cut them because she was, apparently, I'm in a faking hurry to get to the bank. They deny her, which sends her into another age. Fuck. This whole bullshit university. I faking hate it. I wish I would have went to New York. She jumps into easily a $30,000 Corvette and shoves it into reverse. She pulls out into the aisle of cars and then puts it in drive, loses control of the car, and hops a divider, basically beaching her car with its super lower clearance on the thing. The back wheels get traction just enough for the car to suddenly lurch backwards and the whole front bumper rips off and extends enough to detach from the body of the car, but not totally off of the car, to let her go anywhere. Gets out, starts slamming her fists in the hood. She is screaming so loud I can hear her through the thick glass that separates us from the outside parking lot. And like clockwork erupts truck to hit a puddle next to her and faking drench her with water from about her hip down to her legs, and she was wearing a skirt. She only partially moved herself away from the water and started screaming I get off in 15 minutes from her little episode. But stay at work for the next 2 hours watching her have a breakdown as the tow truck shows up to get her car off the median, and, what I can assume is a boyfriend, picks her up in an equally expensive car with a towel in the front seat, so she doesn't mess up his interior. The moment he got out of the car, she starts screaming at him for making her wait almost an hour to come and get her, and he just looks 100% defeated. I sat there with a cherry Fanta and watched it all from a window. I'm sure daddy paid for it all, but hey, it was entertaining. My older brother is a bit of a brat, always has been, and now he's 44. He got a good job by lying on his resume, his application, in his interview. He has a criminal past, nothing serious. He was arrested for not paying his tickets and driving on a suspended license, not drugs or violence. He worked for this company for about 3 months when he was found out. Not sure how. I know I didn't tell them. When they confronted him with the arrest report or whatever evidence they had, he tripled down on his lying and said his identity had been stolen and used by me. We look nothing alike. They had his mugshot. It didn't help his case that his boss found the busted magazine he was in. Not sure if everyone has this. It's a magazine with all local mugshots in it. They pay part of your bail if you let them print it. I found out because his accusations were heard by a family friend, and he called me and told me that this is a big time accusation and a felony. I have since cut contact with him. Okay, back to his job. They knew better and didn't even let him take his possessions from his desk. A security guard boxes it up and they escorted him out. I wish I had seen it. We were told he was crying and screaming about how ex-cons like me just want a chance to live. So I had to keep in mind his arrest for driving violations and all misdemeanors. He was only in jail for about 2.5 hours till he made bail. He's not a hardened criminal. He's 44 with a ratty beard and a beer gut. Not even a dad bod. He bullied me my whole life. He still tried to talk bad about me to other family members at a last family reunion 4 years ago. I'm 41 and I was standing there. He's pathetic and believes everyone loves him and thinks he's perfect when we all see him for what he is. Sad guy who peaked in high school, then got into a bad marriage and ran away from her into the army. He served, I served too, yet he talks like he's the only one who did. Says I don't know what he's been through. We were enlisted during the same time. I do feel kinda bad for his 2 boys because his wife is just like him. I pray they don't end up like them. Thanks for the silver. That's the very first award I've been given for a comment. First, I'd like to thank the Reddit gods for giving me a voice. Next, I'd like to thank my slacker brother for giving me years of grief as a younger sibling. Lastly, I'd like to thank Jeffrey Epstein for not killing himself. I love you all. This is a sad one. My uncles have 3 girls. The 2 oldest ones are in college and the youngest is in middle school, 13. Being the youngest, they spoiled her. If she wanted the moon, they would bring her galaxies. At age 11 she had expensive MacBook clothing. She had every toy possible and the newest iPhone. My uncles have money, they can pay for this stuff. However, little girl was a brat of the worst type. She hated hanging out with my sister, who is the same age as her, because we were the poor of the family, not a lie lol, but that's mean as fuck. Little cousin had been kicked out of 5 schools before reaching 12 and my uncles just didn't have a fuck. Our families didn't intervene because that was a problem between her and her parents, thing I found disturbing because her behavior was starting to cause big problems. The girl would run away from school and turned into a bully to the point she has court citations. But little princess does no harm in her parents' eyes. Well, a few weeks ago I was driving around town when I saw Brat Queen outside school smoking with some older kids. These kids are high school age, some high school dropouts, and she was dressed older than she is. Think short skirt, heels, Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman. I got alarmed and tried to handle the situation as best as I could, asking her if she wanted a ride. She said no, and her friends threatened me to kill me. No problem. I knew they were bluffing. I called my uncles and told them what was happening. They said I was lying because Brat Queen could never do such thing. Fast forward the quarantine week that started 4 days ago and Beat Queen ran away with her 18-year-old boyfriend, a pedophile. She was found in a motel with the creep drinking and doing drugs and saying her parents hate her because they don't give her the sheet she wants. Her parents say this is just her rebel streak and she will be fine. Guys, I'm seriously concerned. I tried reporting this to CPS, but they say there is no problem since the child is healthy and has been. Guys, I'm concerned on how she's going to spiral out of control. Life will hit her harder than a brick to the face. Years ago, a guy in a Porsche Targa got pissed at an accident scene. FDNY had a truck on the shoulder and NYPD and a trooper were holding the road so the tow operator could drag the car up an embankment. The tow cables were stretched and all the stuff was ready to go. I was standing next to the trooper. We had just done the paperwork of the driver of the wreck who was deceased, and in the minivan, this guy in shorts and a Tommy Bahama shirt comes straight at the trooper screaming about the tie-up and how he has business and he lost more money waiting than the trooper made that year. The trooper calmly tells him to get back in his car or he will be arrested. The douche walks back to his car and we continue to finish the paperwork. About 3 minutes goes by and we hear an engine rev up hard and tires squeal. I ducked behind the trooper car and the NYPD cops are screaming at everyone to get out of the way. Dickhead guns his Porsche to go across the road. He took off past us about 300 yards from where the car was stopped, flying along maybe 45 miles per hour. The FDNY guy tackles the tow truck operator and they roll under the tow truck right as Dick in Porsche hits the tow truck cables. The cable was run down and back from a delivery van. The driver had probably fallen asleep at the wheel of the van was down the embankment where you come off the Whitestone Bridge. The Porsche was almost cut in half. The cable was in the engine. The car stretched the cable at least 150 feet like instantly, but the tow truck was a huge kind that pulls tractor trailers and it didn't move. The cable was like a saw. When everything came to rest, the Porsche driver had to be cut out of the car. He was in very bad shape. Broken back and pelvis, was in an open book fracture. I don't think he ever walked again, all because he was too good to wait with everyone else. As we're loading the guy in the bus to run him to the air, the trooper says, "Wonder what this is going to cost him." Stock market just opened. He had a good laugh walking back to his car when a cop or firefighter or paramedic says, "Hold up, it's for a good reason. We don't want to be there either." There was a really annoying kid that always rode on the same bus with me. Didn't really notice him much because I had my earbuds, but whenever I took them out, the only thing I noticed was him. Not only because he had a really annoying sounding voice, but also because he spoke so faking loudly. Whenever I heard him, he was always mean to the bus driver and other kids. The bus driver probably just dismissed it as the actions of an immature child and didn't do anything about it. But one day at the bus stop, there was a different driver who refused entry to that one kid alone. I also had to wait, since that beach would just slip in next to me, so I put out my earbuds and witnessed the spectacle. After asking, the bus driver told me that that brat insulted both him and his company, as he usually does. He already received a few warnings beforehand, but since he ignored those, the bus driver permabanned him from using this bus. That Kid broke out in a panic and cried to the bus driver that there's no other way home besides that one and how his mother will faking kill him. Reluctantly, the driver let him on the bus one last ride, where that kid was just dead silent and contemplating his actions with a teary face. When arriving at the destination, I saw his mom at the parking lot. She had this Karen haircut with sunglasses on. After that Brad told her what's up, she immediately got out of her car and spoke to this bus driver. Didn't hear anything from that conversation. But that kid never showed up at the bus stop after that point. Remember kids, actions have consequences. My former roommate's sister got slapped pretty hard. She knew absolutely nothing of the real world, couldn't do laundry, cook food, clean, nothing. Her mom paid her share of the rent and she didn't have to even work while she was going to college and staying under our roof. She had the perfect setup. Point, she was so dense she kept her social security card in her wallet and it was stolen the first day she moved to the big city. Even though she was warned, but oh, she knew better. Later on she decided she didn't like living with us and our rules, such as you can't let your friends live in our apartment. It's against the lease. If your friends are gonna come over and make a big mess and eat all the food in the house that we pay for, we need compensation. We are fresh from college, low income wage earners at the time, we can't afford it, and she needed to be respectful of quiet hours and clean up after herself. So she decided to make her daddy move her out so she could move in with a diagnosed schizophrenic who refused to take his meds and a hoarder. Her mother and father said, if you move out we won't support you. She did it anyways. Oh, how she beached and moaned. I had to get a job at Burgerville. The people there stole my paycheck from my wallet because I kept all of my paycheck in cash in it. We can't afford internet, it's so expensive. Food is so expensive. Well, she ended up quitting school and moving back in with her mom. My dad's story, not mine. But my uncle was spoiled all his life. Well, my daddy was liked by his parents, but he wasn't one of the favorites. To give you a sense of how bad this guy was, he used to make my dad do his chores, and if he didn't he would get beat up for it, and his mom nor dad won't do anything, because my dad and his uncle had 7 sisters, and he would be left doing chores and hard work, teaching himself how to work hard and not relying on other people unless he needed help from them. Well, later in life my dad and my uncle had a car together. I think it was a Ferrari or something, 70 maybe, don't remember the full details. But my dad was fixing it up all day without his brother's help so that he can take his girlfriend at the time to the airport because she would be leaving back to Germany. He was working on it all day, and whenever he was about to take it out my uncle told him no, he can't go, he hasn't finished all of his stuff yet. Just say my dad was at his greatest shape in the 80s, which is when the story took place. He was able to bench press 500 pounds in high school, and he was a wrestler for 5 years. Basically a guy won't wanna freak with. Well, my uncle fricked around with him, and he took the keys out of the car and stood with them. My dad told him he's been working all day on the car and he deserves to take it out. My dad and my uncle both owned the car and it was in both their names. And no, you're not going to finish the rest of your chores. Basically talk to him like a child. But he was in his 20s to 30s point. After he was finished beating the crap out of him, my dad told my uncle he was gonna die a bitter old man. He did not have anywhere to stay after that, so he asked his mom and dad if he could stay with them, and he told him if he had to spend another second with my uncle he was going to kill him. My grandpa understood and let him stay with them. Over the next 30 years of my uncle's life he was caught selling drugs in West Virginia and doing a lot of illegal stuff. Ever he got old into his 60s and not having any good work ethic, he did die without his family, his friends, and alone and an old man, like my dad said. So I think karma got the best of him. Point at it. I talked to my dad and he said that there was a friend there that tried to help my uncle overpower my dad, but my dad gave him a warning and he did not touch my dad and just let my dad beat the crap of my uncle.